The stars of American Graffiti became icons, addicts, millionaires, and forgotten tragedies. But the shocking truth about where these beloved actors ended up decades later is darker, stranger, and more heartbreaking than fans ever imagined. Richard Dreyfuss was born on October 29, 1947. He played Kurt Henderson, the intelligent dreamer, caught between small-town comfort and the terrifying possibility of a bigger future. In many ways, Kurt was the emotional soul of American Graffiti because he represented every young person who ever stood at the edge of adulthood, wondering whether leaving home was freedom or betrayal. What made Dreyfuss unforgettable in the role was the fact that he understood that conflict in real life long before cameras ever rolled. When Richard walked into his audition, he did something almost nobody in Hollywood dared to do in front of a young director. He criticized George Lucas's script directly. Most actors would have smiled politely and begged for approval. But Dreyfuss challenged Lucas point blank. Ironically, that confidence is exactly what won him the part. Lucas saw intelligence, fearlessness, and authenticity hiding beneath the attitude. At only 24 years old during filming, Dreyfuss gave Kurt Henderson a nervous energy that made the character feel painfully real. He was not the coolest guy in town. He was the young man terrified that life might pass him by if he stayed. The success of American Graffiti launched Dreyfuss into one of the fastest rises Hollywood had ever seen. Within only a few years, he starred in major films like Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, before winning the Academy Award for The Goodbye Girl at just 30 years old. But fame came with a cost. Hollywood rewarded his talent while quietly feeding his self-destruction. Cocaine addiction slowly consumed him during the late 1970s and early 1980s until a horrifying car crash in 1982 nearly ended his life. Years later, he would also reveal his bipolar disorder diagnosis, finally explaining many of the emotional storms he had battled for decades. There is something strangely poetic about Richard Dreyfuss's journey. In American Graffiti, Kurt spends the night searching for meaning while fearing the future. Off-screen, Dreyfuss spent decades fighting his own chaos before finally finding peace within himself. He survived addiction, mental illness, and the brutal machinery of Hollywood fame. By 2026, at 78 years old, Richard Dreyfuss remains alive, still respected, and still carrying the same restless intelligence that made Kurt Henderson unforgettable more than 50 years ago. Cindy Williams was born on August 22, 1947. She played Laurie Henderson Kurt's strong-willed sister and Steve Bolander's emotionally exhausted girlfriend, whose relationship became one of the most realistic portrayals of young love ever captured on film. Laurie was not written like a glamorous Hollywood fantasy. She felt like somebody audiences genuinely knew back in high school, emotional, stubborn, vulnerable, and terrified of losing the people she loved. As adulthood pulled everyone apart, the chemistry between Cindy Williams and Ron Howard happened almost instantly during auditions. George Lucas immediately recognized something rare between them. Their arguments felt natural because they understood the deeper sadness underneath the dialogue. American Graffiti was really about endings disguised as one fun summer night, and Laurie represented the emotional pain of realizing that growing up sometimes means watching relationships slowly slip away. Williams was 25 years old during filming, and unlike many actresses of the era, she brought a grounded sincerity that made audiences trust her immediately. After the success of American Graffiti, she became one of television's biggest stars through Laverne and Shirley, alongside Penny Marshall. The sitcom exploded into a cultural phenomenon because Cindy had the same warmth on screen that she carried in real life. Viewers felt comforted by her presence. For millions of Americans during the 1970s, she became part of their weekly routine and family memories. But behind the laughter of television success, her personal life carried heartbreak. Her marriage to musician Bill Hudson ended painfully, and the pressures of fame slowly exhausted her emotionally. Like many stars from her generation, Cindy Williams discovered that Hollywood celebrates people loudly when they are successful, but grows strangely quiet as they age. In her later years, she focused more on family writing and healing old wounds than chasing attention. When Cindy Williams passed away on January 25th, 2023 at 75 years old, many fans felt something deeper than ordinary celebrity grief. Laurie Henderson had represented innocence standing on the edge of change, and Cindy herself became a reminder of an entire era now disappearing into memory. In American Graffiti, Laurie spent the night afraid of losing the people she loved. Decades later, audiences realized they were the ones afraid of losing her. Candy Clark was born on June 20th, 1947. She played Debbie Dunham, the bubbly blonde whose sweetness and optimism gave American Graffiti some of its most charming moments. Debbie could have easily become a shallow stereotype in another actress's hands, but Candy Clark gave her sincerity, innocence, and emotional warmth that audiences never forgot. Beneath Debbie's playful personality was a young woman searching for connection in a world where everyone seemed afraid of tomorrow. Clark entered the audition process with almost no Hollywood experience and only one screen credit to her name. Instead of trying to act sophisticated, she leaned completely into the film's 1950s atmosphere by arriving dressed fully in period clothing. George Lucas instantly noticed her because she understood something many actors missed. Authenticity matters more than perfection. At 25 years old during filming, Candy worked brutal overnight shoots for weeks while helping create one of the most nostalgic films in American cinema history. What happened afterward exposed the darker side of Hollywood success. American Graffiti earned more than $200 million worldwide, becoming one of the most profitable movies of its generation yet. Candy Clark reportedly earned less than $5,000 for the entire production. No major residuals. No profit participation. The studios became rich while the young actors who carried the film barely saw the money. Still, Candy turned disappointment into survival. Instead of depending completely on Hollywood, she quietly built successful businesses outside the industry, proving she was far smarter than the dizzy blonde image audiences associated with Debbie. Her acting career continued with films like The Man Who Fell to Earth, and she even earned an Academy Award nomination early in her career. Something few expected from the unknown Oklahoma girl who walked into that audition room wearing 1950s clothes. Yet there is something bittersweet about her legacy in American Graffiti. Debbie spent the film clinging to fun and innocence, while the world around her slowly changed forever. In some ways, Hollywood treated Candy Clark the same way America treated the 1950s itself, loved nostalgically, but rarely rewarded properly. By 2026, at 78 years old, she remains alive and respected, a survivor of an industry that often underestimated her from the beginning. Paul Le Mat was born on September 22, 1945. He played John Milner, the legendary drag racer, whose cool confidence hid one painful truth deep down. Milner already sensed his glory days were ending. That quiet sadness is exactly what made the character unforgettable. While younger viewers saw Milner as the coolest guy in town, older audiences recognized something far more tragic. He was a man trapped inside nostalgia before his life had even truly begun. Unlike many actors in the cast, Paul Le Mat brought real-life toughness into the role. He was a Vietnam veteran and a trained stage actor, which gave Milner an emotional realism impossible to fake. At 26 years old during filming, Le Mat understood exhaustion, disappointment, and loneliness in ways younger actors around him simply could not. George Lucas reportedly recognized immediately that Paul carried the emotional gravity needed for the role. Milner wasn't just driving around California streets. He was driving away from the terrifying realization that youth eventually disappears for everyone. Behind the scenes, Le Mat became part of some of the production's wildest stories. One famous incident involved him throwing Richard Dreyfuss into a hotel swimming pool during horseplay, causing Dreyfuss to injure his forehead badly enough to require makeup coverage during filming. Harrison Ford reportedly joined in the chaos as well. Those stories now sound funny, but they also reflected the reckless energy surrounding young Hollywood actors suddenly tasting freedom and opportunity. After American Graffiti, LeMat earned major praise for Melvin and Howard, and proved he possessed far more depth than just the cool racer image audiences loved. Still, unlike some co-stars, he never fully chased superstardom. Perhaps he understood something important: early Hollywood fame can vanish as quickly as it appears. That awareness may have protected him from some of the destruction that consumed others from his era. There is a heartbreaking irony in John Milner's story. In American Graffiti, he desperately holds on to a disappearing world of hot rods, cruising, and teenage freedom because he knows the future is coming, whether he wants it or not. Paul Le Mat's performance captured the universal fear of aging before people even realize they are getting older. By 2026, around 80 years old, Le Mat lives quietly away from Hollywood attention, but his performance still resonates because every generation eventually understands Milner's pain. Nobody outruns time forever. Charles Martin Smith was born on October 30th, 1953. He played Terry the Toad Fields, the awkward, insecure teenager who spent one unforgettable night trying desperately to become somebody cooler, braver, and more confident than he really believed he was. Out of all the characters in American Graffiti, Terry may have been the most relatable because almost everybody remembers a moment in life when they felt invisible. He was not the handsome rebel, the tough racer, or the confident heartthrob. He was the outsider, hoping somebody would finally notice him. Smith was only 18 years old during filming, and what made his performance so powerful was how genuine it felt. Terry did not come across like a Hollywood caricature of a nerd. He felt painfully human. Every nervous smile, every awkward conversation, and every desperate attempt to impress people reflected the universal fear of not being enough. George Lucas understood that American Graffiti worked best when its characters felt authentic, and Charles Martin Smith gave the film its emotional vulnerability. One of the most memorable parts of the movie involved Terry's unlikely connection with Debbie Dunham, played by Candy Clark. Their chemistry worked because audiences sensed two lonely young people trying to escape their insecurities for one magical night. Underneath the comedy was something much sadder. Terry believed that if this night ended, he might go back to being ignored forever. In many ways, he represented every teenager terrified that adulthood would arrive before they ever figured out who they really were. After the success of American Graffiti, Smith returned for the sequel and slowly built one of the most surprisingly stable careers from the entire cast. While other actors battled addiction, emotional collapse, or fading fame, Charles quietly reinvented himself again and again. He starred in respected films like Never Cry Wolf, and eventually became a successful director working on projects including Air Bud and Dolphin Tale. What makes his story remarkable is not explosive fame, but longevity. Hollywood destroys most careers within a few years, yet Smith continued working steadily for decades because he understood the importance of adaptability. There is something deeply meaningful about Terry the Toad's legacy today. Throughout American Graffiti, Terry spends the entire night pretending to be someone else because he believes the real version of himself is not impressive enough. But over time, audiences realized something beautiful. Terry was the most sincere character in the entire movie. Charles Martin Smith carried that same sincerity throughout his real life and career. By 2026, at 72 years old, he remains alive, respected, and quietly admired by generations of film fans who now understand that sometimes the so-called loser becomes the person who survives Hollywood with the most dignity intact. Mackenzie Phillips was born on November 10, 1959. She played Carol Morrison, the loud, unpredictable young girl who spends much of American Graffiti driving John Milner completely crazy while secretly forcing him to confront his own loneliness and emotional immaturity. Carol brought chaos, humor, and non-stop energy into the film. But behind Mackenzie Phillips's bright smile was a painful reality almost nobody around her fully understood at the time. What made her performance feel so natural was the heartbreaking truth that she was already growing up much too fast, long before cameras started rolling. Phillips was reportedly discovered almost by accident and brought in to audition while still very young. At only 12 years old during filming, she instantly stood out because she possessed a rebellious personality that could not be taught. Carol felt authentic because Mackenzie herself already carried the attitude of somebody trying desperately to appear older and tougher than she really was. Tragically, by the time American Graffiti entered production, Mackenzie had already begun experimenting with drugs. Looking back now that reality gives her entire performance a much darker emotional layer. After the film became a cultural phenomenon, Mackenzie quickly rose to television fame through One Day at a Time and briefly became one of America's biggest young stars. But addiction slowly destroyed the stability fame had created. Arrests, relapses, and emotional breakdowns turned her into another tragic example of Hollywood creating child stars faster than it protected them. Then came the devastating revelations in her 2009 memoir, where she accused her father, musician John Phillips, of years of abuse. Suddenly, audiences no longer saw a reckless celebrity spiraling out of control. They saw a wounded child trying to survive unbearable trauma. There is a painful irony in her story. In American Graffiti, Carol constantly pushes John Milner to stop running from responsibility and finally grow up. Off-screen, Mackenzie Phillips spent decades trying to recover the childhood she never truly had. Yet despite addiction, public scandal, and emotional devastation, she survived. By 2026, at 66 years old, Mackenzie remained sober and open about her past, proving that survival itself can sometimes become the bravest victory of all. Ron Howard was born on March 1, 1954. He played Steve Belander, the confident high school senior preparing to leave town for college, while slowly realizing that growing up may cost him the relationship he takes most for granted. Steve often acted arrogant and emotionally immature, especially toward Laurie Henderson, but that was exactly why audiences believed him. He represented countless young men trying to appear certain about adulthood while secretly terrified of the future waiting beyond their hometown. Unlike most of the cast, Ron Howard entered American Graffiti already famous. America had watched him grow up for years on The Andy Griffith Show as little Opie Taylor, making him one of the most recognizable young faces in the country. Ironically, Howard nearly turned the film down because his agent described it as a musical, and Ron wanted absolutely nothing to do with singing on screen. Thankfully, he reconsidered, because American Graffiti became the bridge between his childhood fame and the legendary career that followed. Howard was only 18 years old during filming, but he already understood something many actors never learn: early fame can become a trap. After the success of American Graffiti, he starred in Happy Days and once again became a television superstar. But instead of clinging desperately to acting fame, Howard made one of the smartest decisions in Hollywood history. He stepped behind the camera and reinvented himself completely. That decision changed his life forever. Over the next several decades, Ron Howard directed critically acclaimed films like Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind, eventually winning the Academy Award for Best Director. While many actors from the 1970s became trapped inside nostalgia or destroyed by ego, Howard quietly evolved into one of the industry's most respected filmmakers. His success came not from trying to stay young forever, but from understanding when it was time to grow. There is something poetic about Steve Belander's journey in American Graffiti. Throughout the film, Steve believes adulthood is simply about leaving town and chasing opportunity somewhere bigger. But Ron Howard's real life eventually revealed a much deeper truth. Lasting success requires humility, reinvention, discipline, and emotional maturity. By 2026, at 72 years old, Ron Howard remains one of Hollywood's most admired figures because he understood when it was time to become more than the version of himself audiences first loved. If you enjoyed this journey back into the world of American Graffiti, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold Hollywood stories. More than 50 years later, these actors remind us that fame fades, youth disappears, and life rarely unfolds the way we expect. Some found success, others heartbreak, but together they created a timeless legacy, proving that the memories we cherish most often come from moments we never realized would matter forever.